episode number 45, Alan Brodie.
All right, cut to edge of stage. Great. All right, color frost.
Check. 1, 2, 3. Check.
Stand by, please. Heads to half, heads out, letting cues 1 through 10, down cues 1 through 10.
Welcome back to the Title Block, a podcast about Canadian theatre designers, their history, and their craft. I am, as usual, your host, Michael Cruz, and this time I have an interview with lighting designer and director now, Alan Brodie, from the Shaw Festival, recorded in May of 2017. Alan and I first met while I was an assistant at the Shaw in 1997, but I quickly realized that this was not the first time I had encountered him. Well, a crew member in Kitchener, Ontario at the Centre in the Square in 1991 for the Phantom of the Opera tour, I noticed one of the associate LDs running around with a piece of double R59 to focus lights. He was sort of holding it up to his eyes and staring at the lights. Now, I had not seen this technique before, and I was intrigued. I was used to staring into the barrel of a lamp to find the source and center it on my head, but it had never occurred to me, I was young, that I could use a double indigo to preserve my sight while squinting at the focus charts. I know, I was a noob. I was also sure that I wanted to be just like him. Now, Alan and I talk about that tour and the rest of his life as a Vancouver-based designer, and his recent return to graduate school to train as a director in the next couple of hours. If you want to follow along and with our discussion with visuals and background, be sure to check out the show notes with links to Alan's work and other moments in theater history. Also, please consider supporting the Title Block on patreon.com. I don't get paid, but I do have to cover costs of web hosting, recording equipment, and now travel. So your help to continue capturing the history and present state of Canadian theatre design would be appreciated. Thanks again to those who already support it. Click the Patreon button at thetitleBlock.com or search for us on your Patreon page. Now here is my interview with lighting designer Alan Brodie. Since 1989, Alan Brodie has been designing lights and sets across the country, including in the U.S., over in Europe, and early in his career, he started on The Phantom of the Opera, which we will talk about a bit later. But in the meantime, Alan Brodie, thank you, and welcome to the Title Block.
Thanks. It's my pleasure to be here.
We first met in 1997, which was 20 years ago.
Oh, Lord.
Yes, I know. It was a long time ago. And I'm so glad to have you here because I've been wanting to talk to you for a while.
It's great. I'm thrilled to do it.
And you are Vancouver-based.
That's right.
Where were you born?
I was born in Vancouver.
In Vancouver.
I grew up in Terrace, B.C., a small logging town up in the northern half of the province, and then moved back down to Vancouver to go to do theater studies at UBC after I finished high school. And I've lived there ever since.
And what made you decide to go down to study theater after high school? Did you do theater in high school?
I did high school theater.
Yeah.
And I think like so many people that get into this business, you start on the stage. It seems like that's the case. So, but actually, my first exposure and experience of involvement in the arts was in music, actually. I had two parents my parents were both musicians. And so it started, studying piano and there was a very, very active annual music festival up in that region. And so for years and years, I participated first in, doing piano and singing with my mom's choirs and then in high school band competition and also in what they call in the festivals, speech arts or elocution, I guess. Yeah. And so that was what first got me onto the stage. And then in junior high, I took theater arts, which involved being in a couple plays. And in grade 11, I took stagecraft. It was one of the electives offered. And this is in a small town of about 11,000 people. Yeah. But what we had going for us was that the local community theater, which is about a 700-seater, was managed by the school district. And it was across the parking lot from the high school. And so there was this natural place for us to practice hands-on stagecraft. And so I took stagecraft in grade 11, and it was a bit of a revelation. I was fortunate to have the insight that that it was a really good fit for me. It was satisfying both technically and creatively, and those were, two sort of the two aspects of my temperament, I guess, my creative temperament. And I don't know what possessed me to think that I should go to university and study to be a lighting designer. It wasn't like I had lighting designer mentors as a kid in grade 11. I didn't even look very long at what school I should go to. My high school drama teacher brought my attention to Niagara College, which at the time was still in business. And I looked at that, and I'd applied to UBC, was accepted at UBC. I don't know if I'd be accepted at UBC today, but at the time, we're talking the mid-'80s. But I was pretty young. Like I was 17 when I finished high school, and I was a young 17-year-old. I was pretty sheltered and grew up in a small town, and I just wasn't ready to move across the country to a province that I'd never been to a school that I knew nothing about. And by going to UBC, I was able to live with family members for the first couple of years of my time there. And then when I sort of felt a bit more adult, I was able to spread my wings a bit more. So, UBC. So I did a BFA in theater studies, sort of, you didn't have to declare a major or anything like that, but it was clear that lighting was what I wanted to do. Bonnie Beecher was in my class for a year at UBC. And then she flew the coop for Banff and then Halifax. And I think that it would have been an interesting challenge if we'd both stayed in the program together. There wasn't a lot of lighting to go around. At that time, undergrads weren't designing any main stage shows at UBC, so it was really studio stuff to do. And so I think if there'd been two wannabe lighting designers in the program at the same time, there would have been some bumping of elbows. So it was probably better I think she was drawn to something else at the time, and it was probably better for me in terms of just getting a bunch of practice in, that I didn't have somebody else that wanted the work as well.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting that in many cases, when I talk to people, not that the industry's not that big, and every year there are hundreds of people graduating from these programs. And despite that, all the people who are still working after 20 or 30 years in the business say, I was at school with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, all 5 or 10 big names.
Right.
And the fact that Bonnie Beecher
I know.
right, and you are in the same class together
at UBC.
It's kind of crazy, right?
It is, yeah.
It's something else must be going on. Like there's a generational thing, or maybe it's hindsight. Who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting for me too that the region of northern BC that I came from also produced a number of people that still work in the business. So Adrian Muir is a lighting designer based in Vancouver, and he grew up in Kitimat. Crystal Pite lived in Terrace when she was a young girl. Kim Collier was from Kitimat. She's from the electric company. My friend and agent Ian Arnold, he was my best friend from junior high school. And so it's interesting. Someone once said, "Oh, there must be something in the water in that area." Like like Crystal and Kim alone to have come out of that same valley in northern BC. Like that's pretty. Like that. Those are two powerhouse theater makers, Exactly. So it's interesting.
I had the same experience in Kitchener. There was a big performing arts school that happened in the late 80s, and there's a bunch of people from musical theater and dance that came out of that are still around today.
Yeah.
And we had the same kind of question. In fact, when I went to Ryerson, there were, I went to Ryerson in 91, and there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us that came from that program in that year, or spread over 2 years at Ryerson. So, yeah, I think there's people find each other as well.
Sure.
There's got to be. I mean, maybe randomness is just clumpy, but there's got to be something else going on.
But there's so many other factors in terms of whether people have longevity or not. Like there's so many variables in terms of who sticks around. Like there's, like you say, there's so many people coming out of school now that there's not enough work for them all. So there's some natural attrition that has to take place in order to keep the ecosystem in balance. And it took 10 years of working before I felt at all confident that I could make the bills and not have to cash in my RSP in 6 months' time to pay the rent, and lots of people aren't willing to wait for 10 years to discover whether their chosen field is going to work out for them or not. So,
especially these days. So you go to UBC.
Yeah.
You have an MFA, but you didn't pursue that right away. That seems to be a bit of a Western, because there's programs at UBC, UVic, and
U of A, U of C.
Yeah.
I was always interested in doing more school. I've said that I wasn't a great university student. I was a fantastic theater student.
Right.
Like, I lived and breathed it for 4 years, but I skated by on the academic side. But, I always knew I had that capacity. I'd been a good student in high school, but I hadn't really learned how to work hard academically. And it seemed like working hard on my theater work was more important than learning how to write good papers as an undergrad. Yeah. But I also felt I was also interested in going back to school, and I was interested in teaching. But I also thought, I don't want to be, and no slight against those people who do their BFA and then do their MFA and then get a teaching gig, like, good for you. Yeah. But I wanted to be, if I was going to be a teacher, I wanted to be a teacher who brought experience to the table. And so I thought, I just need to get out and build a career, and maybe one day I'll get to go back to school, and maybe one day I'll get to teach, but not yet. Yeah. So, and now it's been almost 30 years since I finished at UBC, and now I'm maybe too old to get a teaching job. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Just starting to explore that possibility. But
And so, did you start working as an LD right away? Did you do other stagecraft work?
Well, it's funny. I think that people from away from Vancouver would say, oh, Vancouver's a really closed shop. And I certainly experienced that to some degree. I think if you compare Vancouver in 1990 to the Vancouver of today, like, there are so many companies in Vancouver. You could work a show every 2 weeks in Vancouver if you didn't care to get paid. Right. Now, if you're just an emerging lighting designer, so there's tons of opportunity today for the emerging designer to get practice and exposure. In 1990, there were far fewer companies. The whole equity co-op thing was just kind of starting to happen out west, and I certainly felt like I should have been working more than I was as a designer. Mm-hmm. So very soon after graduating UBC, I went to work for Doug Welch, who's was a long-standing set and lighting designer in Vancouver, who was transitioning into being a theater consultant. Mm-hmm. And so, but he still had a vibrant theater practice. Mm-hmm. And as I was coming out of school, I had approached Catherine Shaw at Studio 58. She's the artistic director there, about working for her. I had approached Doug Welch. I'd invited them to come to UBC and see my last show there. We'd done a production of Zastrozzi at UBC. And it was a stylish production, and my work was really well received. And I'd approached Doug, and I don't even know if he saw the show, but I approached him about work, and he said, well, why don't you come on by, and I've got a project on the go, and I could use some help. And he was starting to feel pulled in a few different directions with the theater consulting, and also doing design for events and installations and that kind of stuff. And so for quite a while, I worked in his studio, assisting him on his own work. Mm-hmm. And it was often lighting. So I did a job for him where he would drop me in. He would have done the rough of the plot, and then I would have done the final of the plot. And this was in the day of hand drafting, and maybe some light right. Mm-hmm. So I would handle that side. I'd go in, supervise the hang and the focus, and then Doug would drop in and build the cues. Right. And I did that for him on lots of shows. Right. I want to say I did that. My CV probably says how long that went on for. Probably about 5 years. Right. To varying degrees, but he kept me pretty employed for a while, which is great. I also picked up occasional work as an assistant lighting designer for Vancouver Opera, which which was great and was kind of a revelation. Like I remember as a student, we took a field trip down to the Queen Elizabeth Theatre when Vancouver Opera was loading in The Cunning Little Vixen. And it was at a time when VOA was importing their shows from the Welsh National Opera, or it's probably not the Welsh National Opera, but anyway, opera company in Wales. Sure. And they were beautiful, gorgeous sets, and very often quite postmodern, and the scale of that theater, the 3,000-seater, and it just kind of blew my socks off, you know, and that experience of sitting.
Bonnie Beecher has joined us. She's found us outside the window. It's very funny.
We're lucky she'll do a little dance for us.
Yeah, exactly.
That's hilarious.
Via
Vancouver Opera. Yeah. And I felt like working on a show with music at the heart of it, I was like, oh, this is the right place for me. You know, I'd grown up being involved in music, and for a little while I thought maybe I wanted to be a musician. Mm-hmm. And then in Vancouver, there was no lighting for a young lighting designer doing opera. There were no like sort of small ad hoc opera companies. The dance scene was very, very closed shop. You know, like I would approach a company like, no, thank you, we have our lighting designer. You know, and I got that over and over and over again, not just with dance companies who all use the same lighting designer. So theater was what I started doing when there were opportunities, because that's where the opportunities lay. Yeah. But when I started working in opera and then much later in dance, that felt like the perfect place for me. Because of my training and my background in music, it just felt like such a natural place to live, you know, lighting shows with music at the heart. So I've been, you know, really, really happy that over my career, it's expanded to include, you know, certainly musicals every year, and most years an opera or two as well, and less so dance. It's funny, I'm sort of jumping around here, but I didn't toil in the trenches doing dance the way someone like Kevin did, you know, traveling across the country and working for small companies. I did one dance job in Vancouver for a small company called Movent. Great show. And then I did 3 seasons of doing lighting the dance training program at Banff. Mm-hmm. We should talk about Banff maybe too, because that's a common theme. Yeah. And then I went to the National Ballet of Canada and did a piece for Crystal Pite. Like I kind of just cut right to the top, to the front of the line, you know? And so I never did that toiling away in the trenches of dance. And I'm okay with that. I mean, it would have been great to do, but I'm also happy to work for PNB in Seattle, and like I did the piece that I did for Crystal at the National has gone on to quite an international life. So it's played Seattle. We took it to Glasgow last summer. It's going to Zurich next spring. And then the piece that I did for Crystal at Netherlands Dance Theatre called Plot Point, I did that in 2009 or so. Mm-hmm. Pacific Northwest Ballet is doing it this fall. So I've been really lucky to just get to go straight to the Crystal Pites of the world, you know.
It certainly is an advantage of doing dance as well, because unlike theater, it gets done like once that piece is once that piece is solidified as an important piece, now it gets done again and again and again and again. Yeah. And even, I mean, you don't have to. A lot of times, you don't have to have a giant set waiting in storage. And
that's right. In the case of Emergence, it's a backdrop, you know, and some costumes.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Now we'll talk about Banff. But how long were you freelancing before you got to Banff? You went to Banff in '92.
So what happened was when I was at UBC, I applied to go to the Banff Centre a couple summers in a row, and this was at a time when the Banff Centre. It felt to me like they had a real bias against people coming out of universities. They saw themselves as a conservatory, and they were what I observed was that they weren't plucking people out of universities necessarily. Maybe they just didn't think I was an interesting candidate to them. I applied twice as a student. They were not interested. I did other stuff. So I was like, screw Banff. I don't need to go to Banff. Right. But then working for Doug Welch in '92, I went there to do a production of Ubu the Musical. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the job, Tom Montvilla, who was then the like the manager of the program, approached me and said, "Do you want to come back later this summer and assist Kevin Lamotte on Le Tragédie de Carmen, the Peter Brook musical, or the Peter Brook version of Carmen?" I was like, "Yeah, I could do that." And so that's where I met Kevin.
Right.
And so I assisted Kevin on that production. I mean, with me, the lines are really straight and clear, you know, like worked for Doug Welch, which took me to Banff, met Kevin, assisted him on a show at ATP later that year. And the next year I was actually, that's not quite true. It was 96 when I first came to assist here, but Kevin and I had stayed in touch over the years. But certainly Banff served as a good springboard to meeting Kevin, who's proven to be, you know, along with Morris Panich, Kevin's probably proven to be one of the sort of most central people in my career, you know, in terms of what knowing him has led to, both in terms of aspiring to the kind of work that he does but also, you know, getting a foot in the door at the Shaw Festival as well. And Phantom also was happening around that time as well. I started, so, and that line is quite clear also. I assisted Rob Bosworth, who was then a very busy lighting designer around the country and associate designer. He was then associate designer for the Phantom Tour.
Right.
And he wanted to hire me as his assistant on the first leg of the tour in Ottawa. But Live Ant said, no, we really want you to hire someone from Toronto. So we hired this guy from Toronto. The show then came to Vancouver. And this was in the gravy train days, right? So I got hired as the local assistant. And literally, I was like the photocopy guy and the keep the candy jar full guy. Because this was when Ruthie Mitchell was still dropping in on the show. And you had to have a candy jar on the table to kind of, you know, sweeten the, you know, the conversation going on at the production table.
Right.
Things went really well for me in Vancouver. And what I observed was that the guy who was the first assistant just didn't, I ended up doing a bunch of his work.
Right.
And then when the show moved to Montreal, I moved with it as the first assistant. And then Rob said, I'm leaving the business. I'm going to work for IBM as a computer guy.
Right.
And Live Ant offered me a provisional position on the next stop of the tour as the associate LD, which was back to Ottawa, I think. Okay. And then for the next 4 years, I toured across Canada twice, and we went to Alaska, Singapore, Hong Kong, Hawaii twice, and I did that job as the associate LD right through till 95 when it finally closed in Vancouver for the third time, I think.
Yeah, that's crazy. So tell me about the tour. So
yeah,
like, what was it like? This is a giant show.
It was
the show for
well, it was a full scale sit down production of Phantom that would take 2 weeks from the start of load in to opening.
Right.
I mean, they do that show. The bus and trucks of Phantom now probably perform on the end of day 2. Yeah. But we had a full show deck. Yeah. We had a chandelier that flew and crashed. We had
in the house.
In the house.
From the middle of the house.
From the middle of the house. Yeah. We were like, you know, the crew would go in with, and they would cut out steel. They would add steel. I remember when we went to the theater in Anchorage, the proscenium was this beautiful, faceted, sort of many-planed, almost semicircular sculptural thing. And the Phantom Pross is this giant square thing. And so like, with the sawzall, just like hacking away all of this metal, this beautiful metal. But people, you know, that was still the heyday, the Live Ant heyday of, that was before Showboat or Ragtime. Joseph was their other big moneymaker then, and people wanted to see the full version of the show. Yeah. And so once every 3 or 4 months, I would fly to another town. I just did the jumps. So I wasn't there for the run, obviously. I'd fly in, we'd focus the show, and then we would tune it for that venue and open it, and it would run for 3 or 4 months. And there was a huge appetite for that production. And, you know, our production starred Jeff Hislop for a while, who's a Canadian talent. And it must have been a license for them to print money. But they were spending a lot of money too, you know, like It had a big road crew. Yeah. I had an assistant who was responsible for follow spots. And so over the years, Adrian Muir worked with me on that for quite a while. Yeah. And then toward the very end, I think Heidi Lingeren, now Heidi MacDonald, she came on as my assistant as well. When I got that job, I'd never been outside of BC. Right. And I got that job because of my connection with Rob Bosworth through Vancouver Opera. So again, a very straight line, And so for 5 years, I trooped Phantom around Canada mostly, but also to some Southeast Asian. So Garth Drabinsky had the rights to the non-contiguous states, which is why we went to Alaska and Hawaii as well. It was fantastic. I was seeing the world. I was in my late 20s. And I guess 95. Yeah. That's right. Late 20s. And I was meeting all of these, and it was all Canadians in the cast. I was meeting all these fantastically talented performers, most from Toronto, but, from across the country. Great crews who had been sort of the best crew people that had been pulled from theaters across the country. And so for 5 years, I worked on that show at a scale that I wouldn't work at on my own shows for another 5 years after that.
Yeah, I recall it. I don't think that people today would understand the kind of scale unless they were there. There was, I worked on it at the Cinema Square.
Yeah.
I came back. I was in theater school at Ryerson, and I left for a week and a half to do the install because I thought this is way more important for me than going to my rigging class. Because we were installing automatic winches.
Yeah.
And this was a giant touring house. The stage is 60 by 80.
Yeah. The
grid is 90 feet. We were adding line sets to accommodate it.
Yeah. And when we went to Regina, there wasn't enough counterweight in the town to rig the show. Right. And so, a truck full of counterweight from Toronto set out for Regina in order to finish rigging the show. It was huge. There were 6 follow spots. Which was more spots, like a Vancouver Opera show would have 2 spots. Most theater shows, except for at Shaw and Stratford, you just don't get spots. Or you have to trade off something very expensive in order to get a spot or two, But it also was an inspiration for a long time, that show. Andy Bridges' lighting was so sophisticated and sumptuous. Maria Bjornsson's sets on that show are just out of this world. And so for years, that show inspired many aspects of my own work. And whether it challenged me to use colors that I hadn't used before, or think of, compositional things in a new way, or it fed into my own work in a really impactful way for a long time. So that was a tremendous opportunity. Some years later, I went on to assist on another live event show. We did Sunset Boulevard in Toronto, and I was hired as the local assistant. And so my job was to work with the Moving Lights programmer on documenting the movers. And so Phantom was a totally analog. I mean, the dimming was DMX dimming, but our color changers were semaphore color changers that were driven off of, there's like 2 SOCA lines running out of the booth from this analog controller where you preset the next semaphore move, and then there was a go trigger that would come off the lighting board. It was on an LP90. But I was listening to Vivian Leone interviewed on the In One podcast, and she talked about that show and how well it stood up for so many years, that it didn't need moving lights and it didn't need LEDs, and it worked perfectly well as an old style lighting design. I mean, I say old style. I mean, I remember reading about it in Theatercraft in 1990, never thinking for a second I'd go to work on it, That show, and it gave me a confidence working in big houses, working with a big IA crew, dealing with a producer who was very demanding. Garth was there all the time. There was no out of town, out of sight, out of mind. he was a very hands-on producer of that show. And so I was a very, I was a pretty young lighting designer, having to stand up for my work and advocate for my department and deliver with a demanding producer. All excellent experiences to have at that age. And so when I started designing for Vancouver Opera, or even just becoming a regular on the A-House regional theater circuit, those theaters didn't faze me at all. So it was perfect. I think that there was a compromise for a while because I had to be in these places for these weeks and there was no wiggle room around that. I certainly turned down work as a designer because of Phantom for a while, but in the long term, I think what I gained was very, very valuable. So it's a shame that up and comers today don't have the opportunity for those experiences,
Absolutely. I do have a question about tracking movers. Something I never did.
Yeah.
Because why would I? And I had, by the time I had gotten through here, Live Ant was like crashing and burning.
Yeah.
And so this big show, I think I got, and then the NASDAQ tab, I got onto the Last of the Mohicans musical. There was going to be a Last of the Mohicans musical, and then the NASDAQ crashed, and the show
Right.
never happened. Like, it never happened. Like, all the investors lost their shirts on it before it even got into production. So how did you just describe that kind of process? How did you
the show came in. So in that day, unlike today where, you can run one lighting board to control everything with the EOS family. In those days, Verilights were you still had to lease the rig from Verilight in Dallas, and it came with the Verilight Artisan console. There was no options about what console you used. It was all programmed on the Artisan and ultimately triggered by the lighting desk. But,
through MIDI, or was it through SMPTE or like
probably time code. It might have been SMPTE.
Yeah.
Although I don't quote me on that.
Sure.
That wasn't part of, I arrived when I wasn't there from the very beginning, and it was a show that had the set for that production of Sunset came from LA. The funny thing about that production was that it was never built to tour. Right. So it took 16 weeks to set up and open at the center at the theater in North York. Yeah. I think when it went to Vancouver, it took longer to load in than than the run actually lasted. The job as the moving lights assistant really was about, we weren't tracking in the sense of cue to cue, writing down what it was doing. It was more about creating maps of the focus, and in those days, you'd have a focus palette or whatever you called it, and it would have a name or a number, and that would refer to the scene. And so there might be 20 or 30 movers that were all, positioned and tuned for the scene, and then updated to a preset that represented the whole scene, which is not how I would do it today. I tend to be a little bit more have a finer resolution on that sort of thing, so that I can pull something out of one scene and use it in another scene very easily. It was so long ago, and it was my first exposure to a rig like that. The lights were constantly breaking down.
Any show that you have to have a tech that's responsible for just repairing the Verilights.
Yeah. That's right. You couldn't jump from Q1 to Q100.
Right.
They needed to kind of go through their pathway, or they'd end up, going, not being very precise in where they landed.
Now, all the data was captured in the unit. Like, the unit had its own moves recorded in the body or something, right?
I don't know about that.
It was a long time
I pulled that bind. I'm a bit of a pack rat, and I had an assistant recently who was curious about the early days of movers, and I was showing her. It's a thick binder, It was a very interesting experience to see an experienced programmer make that gear at a time when, looking back, it was pretty primitive. I mean, it wasn't the very beginning of the life of the Verilight, but, we were only 10 years in or something like that at that time. And they were still trying to figure out how to make them work for theater versus concerts. And every year there was a new model, it seemed, that came out, although some things never change, I guess. Yeah. So it was interesting.
Awesome.
And it was great to work with Vivian on that, who's, Vivian Leyshan is one of America's great associate lighting designers. And she really looked out for me and kind of took care of me on that. And it was great to have that experience, and lots of Broadway production production types came up to work to get the show up as well. It really felt like working on a different level. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something we don't do up here. Like associates up here are basically to fill in for people when they've got too much work or something, as opposed to an actual, like, this is the way it works with the designer and the associate carrying out their instructions.
Well, Andy Bridge did show up for a little while on Sunset in Toronto. I'm sure he was, there was some contractual obligation for him to be there for some period of time. He showed up, and I remember thinking, he walked into the room with this air about him, and I thought, this is a rock star lighting designer. Like, I didn't know such a thing existed, but he had this fine leather jacket, and he took us all to this beautiful steakhouse for dinner. And I thought, this guy probably flew here on a private plane, I mean, probably not, but I was pretty impressed.
Awesome. Let's get back to like Canadian theater.
Yeah.
Even though that's that's a time and place that's never
a chapter.
Be repeated, right?
Yeah.
When did you first do your first solo design?
My first solo design?
Yeah.
Oh, it would have been pretty soon after coming out of school. I did, as happens to many of us, we come out of school with a bunch of classmates. And when we're not working for somebody else, we make our own work. And so there was a collective called Full House Theater, and we did Under Milkwood at the Vancouver Fringe one year, and we did this crazy play, this Czech play called The Insect Play at the Fringe. And then Christopher Gaze, who directed Under Milkwood, came to the group and said, folks, I think it's time for the Vancouver Shakespeare Festival to be reborn. And I have this idea about doing that. And how would you like to work with me to bring Shakespeare in Vanier Park back to life again? And so the third Full House Theater production was Bard on the Beach, year one, 1990, I think. I think it was 1990.
And they're still going today.
They're going strong today. Myself and one of my classmates from university, we had been working for the Vancouver Children's Festival as a summer job for a few years. And so we were familiar with what was required to put those saddle-shaped tents up in the park. And we understood, the permit process and needing to get power delivered to the site and booking the porta-johns and all of that stuff. And so Full House Theater was really able to help Christopher, who had this vision for Bard on the Beach, was able to really help him deliver a lot of the practicalities in that first year. But then it became clear that it wasn't a project that was going to work as a co-op, and Christopher was clearly the lead man on that. And we were also all starting to drift in different directions as well. I think that the Fresh Out of School collective has a pretty short lifespan. It sort of serves a purpose. At least in our case, it had a short lifespan. But some of those people are still my good friends, and I still work with lots of them, whether it's actors or designers or whatnot. Mara Gottler was our costume designer in our first year, and at the time she'd been our teacher at UBC teaching costumes, and she designed costumes for the first year of Bard on the Beach, and she's still their costume designer to this day. And then some of the actors that were in that production, in that company, I still work with in varying capacities here and there. But I did start working pretty much right away. There wasn't a lot of dough in it. I was lucky that I had the job at Doug Welch, and I and I had the odd opera with VOA, and then I had Phantom came on stream as well. And so between those three semi-regular things, I was able to then, it kind of took the pressure in a way, it took the pressure off the earliest days of my solo career. I didn't actually have to make a living as a lighting designer. But, you know, so, and I was impatient as well. You know, I was like, why won't the Playhouse hire me? You know, 2 years out of school. And now, of course, I look back and I'm sort of embarrassed. I know full well why they didn't hire me. But, you know, I was working for the Playhouse before too long anyways. Like when I look back now, I think, oh, that was pretty quick actually. You know, like I probably started working for them around 94 or 95. So 5 or 6 years out of school to be working for the big regional theater in your hometown, that's all right. And then the Playhouse was tapped into, you know, there's a lot of co-producing coming on stream then. And so through the Playhouse, I did some stuff with Theatre Calgary in the early days. So that was one of my first out of town jobs was Theatre Calgary. The Belfry, which is on a smaller size theater in Victoria. I did a lot of work for them in the early years, and then sort of took a hiatus from them for a while. Michael Shimada's been running that company the last 10 or so years, and I've started working for them again. And then Vancouver started doing co-pros with MTC, Can Stage. And then The Overcoat came along in 97 was when The Overcoat premiered in Vancouver. And that, you know, you ask about seminal productions or important productions, and that's one of, if not the big one for me, for sure.
Just before we get to that,
Yeah.
I did want to say that we used to, it's not unusual for us to cry co-pros because of the work that it would kind of suck up, or the kind of the notion that, you know, why do we have to do all these shows with other people? But by the same token, there's, it gives especially new designers opportunities to get out of their hometown. And
It does do that.
You're at Can Stage, you're at Theatre Calgary, and people get to know you.
Yeah.
What a great opportunity.
There's a couple good things about that. For me, I became really good at moving shows. That's, I think, you know, in terms of my skill set, that's one of my great skills is being able to take a show from point A to point B and understand and to have and practice a really strong process of making those moves, you know. It was good insofar as it gives you a chance to revisit a show. And how often do you do a great show and then it disappears, never to be seen or heard from again? And so the chance to, it actually led me to starting what I call my next time list. So it's I do it on the first page inside my binder, and is something occurs to me during the process, and I go, oh, that's too hard to fix now, or we're too far down the road to go backwards. But if I had a chance to do this again, I would change this color to that, or add this concept, or, you know, that sort of thing. And so I just keep a next time list on all of my shows because you never know what's going to come back. Yeah. But the co-pros did have, the downside was, you know, if Vancouver Playhouse was doing tons of money and Theatre Calgary was doing tons of money, that could have been two different lighting designers getting a full paycheck. And instead it was one lighting designer, as a co-pro, it's one lighting designer getting 1.5 or 1 2/3 paychecks. There is a sense of economy. I think that there's the perception that co-pros save the producers money. And I think they probably can. I mean, I'm not a producer. I don't get to see the books. But my guess is that there's been some co-pros, some epic co-pros that have really cost more money than just doing 2 standalone productions. And some of that comes down to planning and preparation and how well the company, the originating company, or, you know, the partnership of companies gets together. I mean, you know, there's a sort of a infamous 3 or 4-way co-production that Kevin Lamotte did of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah. Oh yes.
And I did a 3-way co-production of red. It wasn't notorious in the way that Jekyll and Hyde was notorious. But we did Can Stage, Vancouver, Citadel, and I did a lot of those for a while.
Was that was with Mizon, right? Jim Mizon did the Red and Troy. Yeah,
beautiful production.
It was beautiful. I saw that. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's terrific. Now let's talk about anything before Overcoat that was important, because it sounds like
no,
that seems
Overcoat
like
was the first big kind of high point. For me.
Well, let's talk about that, because I spoke to Ken MacDonald on what would now be the previous podcast. This will come out before that. About the Overcoat and about its kind of genesis and its history and its kind of life. But how coming in from you would work with Morris before, or was that the first? I'd worked with him 2 or 3 times before that.
The Overcoat was the result of a series of 3 movement works that Morris and Wendy Gorling created at Studio 58. They did a show called Scenes from a Courtroom, and they did a show called Nocturne. And then they did one called The Company. And I lit The Company for them at Studio 58. And that was a really successful production, and was really intriguing in terms of its use of physical storytelling and music, but not physical storytelling in a pantomime or in a dance sense. It really was its own thing. And Glynnis Leyshan was running the Playhouse at the time, and I suspect had seen The Company, and so she commissioned Morris and Wendy to create a work. And they used a bunch of current Studio 58 students as cast, so they really bumped the size of the cast up. It was over 20, I think, which, if you had to pay them all an equity salary, you probably wouldn't do it. But I think probably 6 of them were students or had just finished school, one or the other. It premiered in 97, and it was, I may be repeating what Ken has already said about the show. It was the music of Shostakovich telling the story of the Overcoat, which was by the Russian novelist Nikolai Gogol. And it was really, it was a turning point for me in a few different ways. I hung more lights on that show than I had any business hanging. And I learned a really important lesson, which is, you can hang more lights than you can focus in the time that's allotted. And if you do that and you run out of time on your focus, you still have to finish the focus. Right. So where's that time going to come from? Levels. And I paid a dear price for that. And I remember Leslie McMillan she was the production manager at the place, sitting behind me, tapping her watch. Practically, it felt like she was tapping her watch behind me, going, "Come on, Alan." And I remember her nudging Morris and going, "Get him to go faster." And but I should have done it to myself. I think I probably hung 330, 350 units. It's a big rig, but it was a show that we just didn't quite know what it was going to turn into. It was a premiere of a very ambitious work on a big stage, on an A-house stage. And the piece continued to evolve in the way that shows do during tech and during previews. I was able to pare it down a lot when we did the show many, many more times after that. But Overcoat was the first time I won an award for my lighting. I won the Jesse Award in Vancouver. We all won Jesse Awards for the Overcoat. And then in the year 2000, the CBC commissioned, they had that series called Opening Night. Yeah. And the CBC decided they wanted to make a movie of the Overcoat. Yeah. And so Morris made his first feature-length film. And the temptation is just to set a bunch of cameras up in the theater and shoot it from a bunch of different angles and then really make the movie in the editing room. Mm-hmm. And Morris wasn't interested in doing that. And he had a great cinematographer working with him, a guy named Bob Ashman, who went on to do lots of great Canadian television as a DP, but as a director as well. And Morris learned how to make film on the job. Yeah. And the CBC Radio Orchestra was recorded, a played through soundtrack of the work, which was just staggering. Oh, yeah. And then later in 2000, I'm sort of getting the sequence a bit wrong, maybe, but it was decided that there was enough appetite for the show in Canada that we did a little mini tour. So it came back in Vancouver, and then we played in some order Winnipeg, Ottawa, and Toronto. Yeah. And it was very successful. Yeah. And then I guess the feeling was that it had probably run its course. And that was the time, I think, when Marty Bragg was running Can Stage. And then maybe 2003 or something like that, the property, if you think of the show as a property, it shifted over into Can Stage hands. Oh, yeah. And they decided that they were going to run it more with an eye to getting it to New York. Right. And I believe the season, so then it was presented as part of the World Stage Festival in Toronto. And there were all of these producers that were booked to come and see it. And then the SARS outbreak happened. Oh, yes. And everybody stayed away in droves. Right. It went on to do some international dates as well that Ken probably talked about as well. Yeah. And there was, we were playing the Barbican Centre in London, and there was talk about it transferring to the National Theatre. And then they got a shitty review in one of the papers. Yes. And the meetings the next day were just canceled,
Yeah,
like the meetings for the day after the opening.
Yeah. It sounded terrible. Like everything was going great. The audiences loved it. And then
there were lineups around the block to see the show. But, we were hearing things like American producers are interested, but they think it might be too dark. And so alarm bells start to go off, right? And then, they're like, well, American producers are interested, but they think they need a star. So maybe Mikhail Baryshnikov could play the man. And then I heard, we think the show needs follow spots. I was like, that's not the show. Yeah. Like The Overcoat was a dark show. Yeah. I don't mean a visually dark show. It had a dark essence, Yeah. And so I just think it didn't appeal to a commercial producer. But I'm sure Ken told you that Morris has written an opera version of it, which we're all going to get back together for next year, opening in Toronto and then going to Vancouver. Yeah. That's very exciting.
It's very exciting, absolutely.
I'm not quite sure. Only Morris Panich, who took Moby Dick, arguably the greatest work of American fiction, and turned it into a play without words at Stratford. Yeah. Only Morris would then take his masterwork, The Overcoat, a play without words, and turn it into an opera. Yeah. I love it. I mean, it's so audacious, and I'm so intrigued, and I don't know anything, I hardly know anything about what we're doing yet, so it's still a ways away. Yeah. But The Overcoat, so Overcoat represented a bit of a high point for me in terms of my working process. Like, I learned that I needed to be way more economical. I sort of set a rule for myself coming out of that show. And it may seem really arbitrary or artificial, but what I do is I look on any show today, I look at the schedule and go, how many hours do I have to focus? Okay, 12 hours to focus. On average, sometimes I can go faster, sometimes it goes slower. 20 lamps an hour is reasonable.
Yeah, 5 minutes a lamp, right?
So if I've got 12 hours to focus, I can hang no more than 240 units, period, end of story. Yeah. Because if you do, you're going to get in trouble. You have the potential to get in trouble. And I've used that formula very religiously since then. Yeah. Now, obviously, some shows need more than 20 lamps an hour. But it means that if I hang more than I am comfortable being able to manage, I know that I need to up my game. Yeah. I go in and I hammer, So that was a pretty important lesson to learn, And that show gave me some national profile as well. I think the year that I was nominated for the Dora, for the overcoat, the Lion King won.
Right.
Because
Damn Lion
for some
King.
unknown reason, we were up against the Lion King.
Yeah, with 1,000 conventionals in it.
Yeah.
Bastards. So when did you get to the Shaw?
I came to the Shaw in 96 as an assistant.
Yes.
So what happened was, as you know, because you assisted here, there used to be this sort of routine of a 2-year cycle. You'd come in as the junior assistant, you'd work in the courthouse of the George, and then your second year back, you'd assist in the festival, and then you'd get the boot. Yeah. And so it was sort of a, you're in, you do the job, and you go away. Yeah. There was a breakdown in that cycle going into the season of 96. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Rob Thompson was the director of lighting design, and I'd assisted Rob a number of times. I mean, that was one of the, just to circle back to Vancouver Opera, that's where I met Shalom, Michael Whitfield, Harry Frainer, Rob Thompson, Rob Bosworth, Guy Samard. There's probably one or two others. But that was also a really seminal experience for me, was coming into contact with all of those lighting designers. Yeah. So in 96, the Shaw needed someone who could drop into the second year assistant's role. Oh, yeah. And I was really starting to phase out of being an assistant by then. Yeah. But I got the call and I thought, well, it's probably, it's not a lifetime appointment, I'm probably going to be in and out. But it can't hurt. And I hadn't worked at Stratford at that point. And so I took the job because they needed a ringer. They needed someone with some good assisting chop who could just drop into the festival and just do the job. Yeah. And then the next year, I didn't come back because they were still operating under the same pattern of hiring.
Yeah, that was my first year.
97?
Yeah.
Right.
And Phil Sagan was on the festival,
Right. So I didn't come back in 97. And then Kevin became the director of lighting. And he did the hiring for the season, or he was involved in the hiring for 98. So my first year as a designer was 98. Right. And I worked, I did the lighting for The Ladies Not for Burning for Christopher Newton. So that was my first show at the festival in the courthouse. And I've been here, with a few exceptions, I've been here almost every year since then, which was more than 20 years ago now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Not quite 20 years. And many seasons I've done 2 shows. A few seasons I've done 1, and a couple seasons I've done 3 shows. But I live in Vancouver, and it's not like I can go home on weekends. It's not like it's not like there's a break in the schedule where I can get home to see my wife or get back to the rest of my life. So that's I've had a very very fulfilling experience working at the Shaw. But it's come with some challenges as far as working away from home. Yeah. Like that first year as an assistant, I was here for 17 weeks and I didn't get home. Yeah. I think my girlfriend, who's now my wife, did come out for a visit partway through. And that's really how we've managed it since then. But I'm often here for 2 or 3 months. And Michelle would come out for a week or 2, visit in the middle of it. The itinerant life of the lighting designer, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Any favorite shows while at Shaw over the last 20 years that you were really proud of?
Detective Story was a pretty special show. Yeah. That was with Neil Monroe. Cameron Porteous designed the set. Yeah. And it was a very unusual design. It was very letterbox shaped. It was a low, wide set. Yeah. That was one of those classic Shaw productions where it seemed like every company member had a part in that play. Nice. I mean, it was just a parade of actors. Yes. There must have been 30 characters in that play, and there was no doubling. Right. It was fantastic. Yeah. And Cameron had this idea, Cameron and Neil had this idea about bathing the stage in this mottled light. And this was still when we were hanging and using Pani projectors on the rail. And so Cameron produced an image, a piece of abstract art by Jackson Pollock, a black and white thing. And we just bathed a stage in this very high contrast, sharp edged. And it became like a camouflage effect to the stage. Actors could move through it, and you couldn't really see that actors were moving through it. And I've referenced that at other times on other productions as an idea. You know, we did another show with Cameron and Christopher. We did something for the COC. Oh man, my brain. I forget what it was called. Anyway, similar idea. So it was an idea that we recycled again in a new way. But Detective Story was very special. You know, I've gone on to work first with Ken MacDonald here. We did The Coronation Voyage was Ken's first show here. I sort of had to twist his arm into taking the job. It's like, but Morris isn't doing it. It's like, it's okay. I'm doing it. Come and have fun. And then I think the next season, Morris did his first show here. He did Nothing Sacred at the festival. And so I haven't done all of Morris's work here, but I've done a bunch of it. I think that I was very proud of Ragtime here. I was very proud of Sweeney Todd as well.
I heard great things about Sweeney Todd when it was produced.
It was a special production as well. Yeah, I think that those three for me. Wow, my mind. I'm having a hard time remembering the names of shows.
I have a list here.
Anatole. The something of Anatole at the Shaw. The Amorous Adventures of Anatole.
Oh, right.
Which was a show. No. I'm getting it wrong. No. Hotel Peccadillo. Okay. That's what I'm thinking of. Okay. We didn't do Anatole here. Hotel Peccadillo was another Morris Panich show. Yeah. And it was a very, Ken MacDonald's design was all very forced perspective and crazy colors. And that was a wild farce, but it was tremendously fun. Yeah, but I loved doing A Wilderness in the courthouse. I think Joe Ziegler directed A Wilderness, doing that O'Neill play, Summer and Smoke with Neil, which I went on to direct when I went back to school recently. I directed Summer and Smoke. I really tried to pick a play I hadn't lit, but it was pretty hard. Exactly. Anyway, I think those are off the cuff. Those may be my highlights here, or my faves, anyways.
And you've also worked at Stratford.
Yeah, less so. My first show at Stratford was in 2007. Yeah. I did Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Talk about jumping in the deep end of the pool. Yeah, but it was a beautiful production. It was very successful, and I went on to do maybe 5 years worth of work there. I did a few shows, mostly actually in the festival. And again, I did a couple Morris Panich productions. We did Moby Dick in the studio one season, and then we did his musical play called Wanderlust at the Tom Patterson. That was my last show there. Those were crazy years because I was also working at Shaw. Almost each of those seasons, I was also working at Shaw, and I was engaged in this insane commute up and down the 403. And not living here, I was, I had 3 homes. I had my home in Vancouver, an apartment in Stratford, and an apartment in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Right. And these mad early morning commutes to make one call or the other. It was exciting. It was an exciting time, and it was really rewarding. And I was thrilled to have that opportunity to work at Stratford. But it was also really stressful. Oftentimes it was still in the winter months. And so it's like, did it snow overnight? And is the drive going to be horrible? And am I going to make it back in time? And it's a bit stressful. I remember one season doing Little Night Music with Morris here at the same time or virtually the same time as doing Moby Dick with Morris at Stratford. Right. And so I sort of had my director captive because we'd commute sometimes together. Right. And so Morris, who famously doesn't like to do meetings, one day I was like, I'll give you a ride down to Niagara. And then I sort of feel like I tricked him into a 2 hour meeting without him knowing that's what I was doing. So, yeah.
Awesome. Any other kind of significant shows you want to talk about before we take a break and then come back and talk about process and stuff?
Well, I referred to Crystal Pite earlier, and her work Emergence has gone on to some international acclaim, great international acclaim. I think that the work that I did with Kim Collier on Tear the Curtain, which was sort of hailed as a bit of a breakthrough production in terms of being a film, a really compelling, striking film theater hybrid. It wasn't the first film theater hybrid, and it won't be the last, but it was a very unique production, and it went on to, it had great success in Vancouver, and then it played at Can Stage as well subsequently to that. I think for me, I look at more so than the productions being highlights, I think of the collaborations as being the highlights. And so, I've done more than 20 shows with Morris over the years, and he's been my most frequent collaborator. I feel really lucky to have worked with Kim Collier, Crystal Pite, Neil Monroe here, Christopher Newton, Jackie. But that I don't mean to downplay all the other incredible collaborators I've worked with. I think that for me, one of the things I'm proud of is being able to continue to call myself a West Coaster, and I've always lived in Vancouver since starting this my working life. Well, since university, there's been lots of temptation to relocate to Toronto. Certainly at times the temptation was greater than other times. But when you're from somewhere, that's where you want to be. And you talk to Maritimers about being from the Maritimes, or people from the prairies being from the prairies. And I'm a Westerner, and I'm a Vancouverite, and we make a lot of sacrifices as it is having a career in this business. And I just didn't want to sacrifice where I lived as well. And so I'm really proud that I've managed to make that work. I'm still married to the same person I've been married to for almost 20 years now. And now we don't have children. And that was, I look at colleagues who over the years have faced real challenges with being away from home and family. And so I knew that this was going to be my life. And so I happened to marry someone who didn't feel the need to have children. And so it worked out well for both of us, But I'm pretty proud of that achievement as well. Being able to have this cross-Canadian profile and demand, and yet continue to live where I want to live, which isn't maybe the most obvious place to live given the concentration of theater that you find in Central Canada.
Hi there, I'm interrupting briefly to ask you once again to support the Title Block on patreon.com. Click on the Patreon button in the show notes. This will bring you to my Patreon page where you can donate a small amount every episode. And I'm just asking you that you help out to cover the costs and help me to continue to capture the history of Canadian theatre design. Go to patreon.com/the Title Block podcast and donate a couple of bucks an episode. It really helps. So let's talk about you're not only are you a set lighting designer who's had great success, you also have been doing set design for the same amount of time. A lot of times we have set designers who also do lighting, but you seem to be a lighting designer who also does set. Is that correct?
I think that's a pretty fair description of it. When I came out of school, I really thought of myself as a lighting designer, and that's what I pitched myself as. But very quickly, particularly with the co-ops and ad hoc companies and the really small stuff, very often companies were looking to find someone who could do more than one discipline. And what I realized was that if I could offer my services in more than one discipline, it would make me more employable. I only wish I'd paid a little bit more attention at theater school to the set design side of the equation. We drafted for a year or part of a year. I did one set design as part of the summer stock company at UBC. But I had the chance to start doing set design almost right away. And I did quite a bit. And in almost every case, I've also lit the show that I've done the set design for. I think with maybe only 2 or 3 exceptions to that. And so they were mostly for very small companies. Often I would also build the set and paint the set myself. And then it kind of tapered off for a little bit, which was fine because my profile as a lighting designer was growing and I was traveling a lot. And that seemed to preclude doing a lot of set design. And then I had a chance, trying to think, Glynnis Leyshan, when she was running the Playhouse, with her there, she asked me to do set and lights for a few shows there. So I did a production of Copenhagen, a production of Stones in His Pockets. And then Max Reimer took over at the Playhouse and he hired me to do, it was this funny production that Knee-High Theatre Company in the UK was meant to come and they'd done this show called Noel Coward's Brief Encounters. I think that's what it was called. And it was based on the David Lean film, Brief Encounter. And Knee-High was supposed to come to Vancouver and do the show. But the show had, after the deal had been done, Knee-High their production had taken off and was going to the West End. Oh. So now the Playhouse was committed to doing their production, but none of them could come and do it. Right. So Max Reimer hired me to basically recreate the original set design from the Knee-High production. We had no drawings. We had no interaction with their team, no support. It was basically, here's an archival video and a script, and some photos of the props backstage from their production. And so that was a really interesting archaeological process, you know. And so, which is kind of what remounting lighting for shows is as well, right? That sort of backwards engineering a show. Yeah. So I did those 3 big shows at the Playhouse. And I had one season where I think in one season I did a production of La Ronde, a production of the musical Little Mercy's First Murder, and a new play in Vancouver called Landscapes of the Dead. And they're all really different and very well received and kind of acclaimed productions. And I thought, here we go. My career as a set and lighting designer we're off. And then it was like radio silence, 10 years of radio silence. And then, so it's been on and off. It's been sporadic. 2016, 16 or 15, 16. The Arts Club in Vancouver was doing Godspell. Right. Sarah Jean Hosey was directing. Yeah. She really wanted projections on the show. And the Arts Club was like, well, you can have 3 designers, but you need to pick what they do. So there was a costume designer, obviously. There was a projection designer, obviously, because she wanted to do that, and a lighting designer. But that left the set design out in the cold. Right. And so Sean and I collaborated to co-set design Godspell for that production. Right. And then...
Sorry, which Sean?
Sorry?
Sean
Neuenhuis.
Yeah.
Projection designer, who lives in Vancouver as well.
Right.
But he's a big international... the Met, Broadway. And then I've just finished a production last month of a little night music for Patrick Street Productions in Vancouver, set and lights. And right now I'm working, while I'm doing Dracula here at the Shaw, I've also got in the pipeline set lights and projection for the first time for a new play being done out in White Rock, BC, a play called Sea of Stories, which was commissioned as part of a Canada 150 venture in the town, in the city of White Rock. And so I've got that happening in the mix. And then my night music is coming back in the fall in another suburb in Vancouver. So I'm back on again. It's a very kind of ebbs and flows, and I would say my strength as a set designer, I'm more of an architectural set designer than I am a finish and detail. Like, you wouldn't hire me to do a period interior, but if you need something that's kind of maybe more architectural or more abstract or imagistic, or a set design that lends itself to to the lighting design. Like that's kind of the natural marriage for me. Certainly the kinds of sets that I create are lend themselves to the lighting design. So so it's been on and off, but it's been a great adjunct to the lighting design, and has certainly brought in some income, and has been very stimulating as well, just in terms of being a creative person and enjoying putting my brain into that other place. It's been great. And I'm excited about tackling the projection design for the show this summer as well, back home. That'll be, I finally thought, I've done this, as a lighting designer, I've worked with and supported projection design for all these years. So, I know some of the stuff. I don't know I don't know some of the technical stuff, but I think from a creative standpoint, I think that I'm in a position to sink my teeth into it. Yeah. Certainly in the future, if teaching is ever to come about for me, I really felt like I needed to have that in my repertoire as well. And it's not like I'm going to suddenly do 20 projection designs in a row, probably. But I think that anybody who's actually done something that they're teaching is a much better teacher than someone who's only ever read about it in a book, or observed it from a distance. So, and I would say that since going back to school, which you're probably going to ask me about shortly, I feel more emboldened to tackle things that I might have just shied away from in the past. I feel more courageous creatively now than I've ever felt before in terms of tackling big challenges or doing things that are scary or doing new things. So, yeah.
So a couple times you've mentioned your work at the Vancouver Playhouse. Tell me what happened, because
I'll do my best.
Yeah, because
I think part of the challenge and part of what has upset the local scene is that we don't really know what happened. Right. And it's
just before you begin, could you just give us a bit of a timeline? Things have.
Yeah, I guess the Playhouse closed. Oh Lord, I'm just guessing here. I want to say 4 years ago, because I went back to school maybe 5 years now. Yeah. Anyway, so the Playhouse was one of the original Canadian regional theaters, and the Playhouse Theatre Company was a entity, and they performed in a theater called the Vancouver Playhouse. Very confusing. And the Vancouver Playhouse is still a venue owned and managed and staffed by the city of Vancouver. And so any tenant of that theater space is a temporary resident. The Vancouver Playhouse Theatre Company was sort of the resident theatre company, and they did a season of between 4 to 7 shows sort of over the years. They sort of push me, pull you in and out a little bit, more or fewer productions. The theater company basically shut down suddenly about 5 years ago with very little advanced warning. Very little fanfare. It was suddenly announced that the Vancouver Playhouse was closing. And while there was a great outcry amongst the theater community, particularly the people who had been employed by that theater, there wasn't much outcry from the community. And so I'm not sure what that tells you, except I think it must relate to where the theater company had got to in terms of they were under some financial pressures. They had a deficit, and the numbers at the box office weren't great. The one aspect of the story is that the piece of property that the Playhouse Theatre Company occupied as for rehearsal space and scene shop and costume shop and all of their administrative offices, was on a piece of land on False Creek South, which was slated to become the Olympic Village for the 2010 Olympics. And so a developer came along, and they were going to turn this piece of property into a high rise. And then a deal was negotiated between, and my apologies to anybody who knows more about this story, that I'm screwing it up. A developer came along, and a deal was struck between the Playhouse Theatre Company and the developer that they would commit the ground floor of this new high rise to become the shiny new home of the Vancouver Playhouse Theatre Company. Right. And then the economic downturn of 2008 happened, and that developer put that project on hold. So the Playhouse Theatre Company had vacated that property and moved to another nearby property that used to be the Watson Glove Factory, about 4 blocks away. But it was a pricey piece of land, and they were paying real rent. Like they were paying commercial rent for a space. There was no subsidized, my understanding is there was little subsidization of what they were paying to occupy that temporary space. And then when the development deal went on hold because of the economic downturn of 2008, the new home that they were supposed to move into as soon as the Olympics were done was on hold indefinitely. Yeah. And so, and in the meantime, they were hemorrhaging money paying commercial rent in this space. And so just to sort of sum it up, my understanding is that happening put a lot of financial pressure on the company. Yeah. They went to the city of Vancouver looking for some kind of relief or operational grant that they weren't receiving, or a deferment of what they owed, or I don't know, something. Yeah. And my understanding is that it wasn't granted. Right. And I'm sure there was lots of backroom machinations going on to try to not fold the company. I'm not quite sure how you get to a theater company 1 week saying we might be closing soon to 1 week later closing. Right. So optically, it looked terrible. Yeah. The board of directors came under a lot of criticism from outside by people who, I don't really know what really happened. And I know that Max Reimer had a reputation for being a theater saver. Mm-hmm. He saved Theater Aquarius, and he saved Huron County Playhouse, I think. Like that was his reputation, was he was a fixer. He was a guy that you brought in when your company was in financial trouble, and he could broker the deals between all of the stakeholders to ensure the survival of the company. So Vancouver Playhouse closed. And so they were a big employer. They had their own scene shop. I mean, Can Stage closed their scene shop ages ago. Yeah. Playhouse built a lot of costumes, not only built scenery for the Playhouse productions, but that shop got rented out to lots of other users. Bard on the Beach used their wardrobe. Like it was a real hub. Yeah. And they paid the best rates in town. Yeah. Now, something that we haven't talked about is the spectrum of pay across the country and the divide that is the Rocky Mountains. And I would say, without going into it in great detail, I would say that historically, if you're working in BC, you're probably making 30% less than that company's counterpart in Calgary or whatever. And so the ecosystem was already kind of fragile, in that we're already making less money by working in that place. Mm-hmm. And what's happened is, but Vancouver Playhouse really did functional. I mean, you can argue with their programming choices. You can argue with, they changed their mandate at one point and said, we're only doing, modern plays. We're not doing classics or whatever. You can argue with all of those choices. But in the end, I do believe they were functioning as a regional theater. They were a site of lots of cross-pollination of artists coming in and going out. The work that was created there was going other places. There was a regionality about what happened in that theater company. And with the closure of the company, there is now no longer a regional theater in Vancouver. It's not like the Arts Club, which has historically been a much more successful organization than the Playhouse in terms of bums and seats and the bottom line. The Arts Club, to my impression, didn't change their MO. No. They didn't go, we now carry the mantle of being Vancouver's regional theater. So there is no regional theater in Vancouver. Yeah. The Arts Club largely hires local. Yeah. They don't co-produce. Well, that's not true. They do a little bit of co-producing, but it's still within the region, you know. Very few directors, almost all the directors are local. I would say virtually all of the designers are local. And with few exceptions, all of their actors, performers are local. Yeah. So they're not functioning in that way in terms of being a crossroads. You know, they do lots of new work and blah, blah, blah. So there's lots of good stuff that's happening at the Arts Club. But personally speaking, I took a big hit. You know, like I was doing 1 or 2 shows a season for them, but making better than I was earning at any other theater in Vancouver. And so the fact that there was no outcry, you know, there's virtually no outcry. There were some artists going, please save our theater, you know, but there was no public outcry. There was some public kind of going, what the hell's going on at the Playhouse? But there was no public outcry going, we demand to have this theater functional because it's an important, vibrant part of our community. Yeah. That never happened. Yeah. And so it makes me scratch my head a little bit about what's happening out there, you know, and from what we earn on down, the ecosystem is still a bit broken out there. You know, there's tons of companies in Vancouver, but you can't make a living working for 95% of them because they're doing one-offs and they're paying minimal fees. So it's a bit strange out there. Yeah. And in spite of that, I still live there.
Because it's a beautiful place to live. All right, just before we move on to process and your MFA, I just wanted to touch on the 2010 Paralympic Winter Games opening ceremonies because you were this fall spot director, and I wanted to just talk about what was that like. Yeah, it's a huge. I mean, it's big. It's televised. There's like a whole bunch of moving parts. How'd you get hired? I mean, it was in Vancouver, but like, what was your experience?
Well, the lighting director for the Paralympic opening ceremonies was a local Vancouver lighting designer named Rob Sondergaard. And his firm was hired by the producer of the Paralympic opening ceremonies to provide the lighting design and coordination for that event. We inherited the rig from the main games opening ceremonies or from their closing ceremonies. I think that we stripped the rig from 1,000 movers down to 500 movers, I think, for the Paralympics. But, you know, I had done some previous work for Rob and his company, Electric Aura, doing basically being involved in lighting for some events around town. So, you know, like, corporate stuff or special events in strange locations or events in hotel ballrooms and that kind of thing. And Rob is really good at pulling a team of specialists together. And he knew, and I'd previously called spots for a not as ambitious special event for that company. And it had gone really well. And it was a 16 spot installation. And basically we were in the venue at BC Place for, I want to say it was a couple weeks, maybe it was 10 days. But basically it was, a few days of turning the rig around for the new event. And then starting to rehearse with performers. And because at that time, BC Place was, this was before the big renovation that happened to that location where they ripped the translucent inflatable dome off. And so it was a venue that only went dark when it got dark at night. Right. So it meant that there was some work we could do during the daytime, but there's a lot of work that you could only do at nighttime. And so they're working swing shifts so that they get a programming team to come in and work the night shift. And then we'd all come in the morning and we would do a bunch of sort of daytime rehearsals. And then we do actual run-throughs in the evening once the rig was working. And we do the rehearsals at the time that the broadcast would actually happen. Rob was sort of he was the lighting director for the project. There's also, or maybe he was the lighting designer for the project. And then there was a lighting director who worked for him who sat in the TV truck. And so in one ear, I had the TV truck going, more light, or that's too bright or whatever. And in the other ear, I would have the lighting designer feeding me. Anyway, but it was an interesting project, managing 16 spots that's kind of an adventure. And then there's also, I had to create my own calling script. The script there was a script, but it was for the speech parts, not for the interior of any one performance. And there was lots of cueing within each performance. And so I had to devise my own calling script. And it was a really interesting, challenging, satisfying kind of one giant step to the left, They're fun jobs, those. The scale is really fun. And, running, I wasn't running a lamp, but I might as well have been running a lamp. There's sort of that, the adrenaline flows when you're contributing in a live fashion to a show that's coming off, that's being broadcast around the world. Stakes were pretty good and high. Yes. But we had lots of rehearsals and I'd spend hours in the daytime practicing the call, practicing the standbys, without anybody on comm, just practicing. It was good fun. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah.
All right. So let's move to the big question I have for you.
Yeah.
In Bonnie Beecher's interview, I claimed that you told me you had designed 90% of the design by the time you got the set design for the show.
And I'm here to retract that.
Right. Yes, of course. Who knows if it was true? That's what my memory was. But
yeah.
Tell me about, that's a good way into how you start the process.
Yeah.
And tell me about your relation to
I think, I'm sure I said something like that. 90% seems a little bit high. So maybe today I'd agree with Bonnie that it maybe is closer to 50. But I think that maybe what I was meaning was that if you're, as a designer, as the lighting designer, you're coming in toward the end of the process. So there's a bunch of, not to say, there are some jobs that are highly collaborative from the very outset. So not every job is like this, but frequently you come in late in the game and you're handed a set of givens. And those givens are what you have to work with and around. So, I think when I say, 50% of the design or 90% of the design, I think what I'm referring to is if you're paying attention, if you're really understanding the set design, it will tell you what it needs in terms of, I think Bonnie made a comment about the first time she did a ballet and the choreographer said, or maybe it was an opera, and said, there's not going to be any walls. And Bonnie was like, but how am I going to do side light? But really, if you're paying attention and have your thinking cap on and are responding to what you're being given to work with, that's telling you something. There's something bigger about if someone comes to the table with a set where there's walls, that pushes the lighting in a certain direction. And so I think that you need, the job is to be open to reading those cues and to following those cues in a certain direction rather than resisting those cues or feeling like you need to push back against, if the set is a bunch of windows, I think that your job might be to shoot a bunch of light through those windows. It's just a thought. Yeah. So I think that that's really what I was commenting on. But I like Kevin said in his interview with you, we're a bit chameleon-like, I think, or at least I think the best lighting designers are chameleon-like insofar as I try not to bring any one particular style to the table. I try to allow the style of the other designs, the vision, if you want to call it that, of the director, or their thoughts about where they want to take the production. I really try to let that guide me. And if we're doing a show that's, hard-edged and snappy counts and, shafts of light in the air, then that's the show we're doing. But if we're doing a show that's, soft edges and smooth fades, and where the light is a bit more organic and amorphous, then that's what we're doing. And so I think the job is to really pay close attention to what the play gives you, but also what the other designers give you and what the director brings to the table. And that's not to say that there's not tons of room for me to bring my own stuff to bear. I mean, we had a very exciting meeting yesterday around Dracula, which is a show I'm doing here at the Shaw right now. And, the mood in the room was, if it's a good idea, it doesn't matter where it comes from. And so, I was able to roll out some ideas to Cam Davis, who's doing projections, and Michael Gianfrancesco was able to roll some ideas out to me. And so, I think that's when it's at its best, is when we're all just open to a free flow of ideas and inspirations,
All right. So how about process otherwise? I mean, I've talked to a number of designers, and so I think that listeners of the podcast will probably know what the basic process of every lighting designer is now. Is there anything special or individual you do to get inspired, or like through research, or do you really just trying to keep it internal in the production team? Do you have any sort of muses or people whose work you draw from other disciplines, or is it really just contained within the production?
It's not. I would say it's not contained within the production necessarily at all. I really do try to open my. I try to open my curiosity and my receptiveness to whatever comes up. I try to. I love going through a script and circling or highlighting. I mean, there's the obvious stuff that you circle and highlight that you need to remember. But I love the process of going through a play where I don't necessarily understand everything. And so, some research of either a word and its usage, or an idea, or an image or a movement. I love the pathway that research can lead you down, because inevitably one idea leads to another. There's branches, and it's sort of branches of ideas that lead from one place to another. I do love that part of the process. Sadly, it's trying to make a living in this business means that sometimes you're jamming work together a bit closer than you'd like. Yeah. Sadly, one of the phases that really gets compromised most often is the research phase. Frequently, I'm lucky if I get more than a week of sort of gentle build up to the point where I actually have to start putting pen to paper. So if I have more time, I try to do more research. I do love it, and I love one of the things I love about it is that it's there's no pressure on the research phase. Yeah. There's so much pressure when you hit the theater. Yeah. I would say I don't. I would say that I don't have any particular muse in my work. Again, I think I just try to be in the moment, and I don't want to bring something to the table that might define things in a way that don't make logical sense necessarily. In general, in my life, I really respond to music. But it's hard to sort of draw straight lines between being inspired by a certain piece of music and what you're doing on the stage, except that I do think that in a way, my work has almost become my way of making music now. And I don't make music anymore. There was for years and years, I was involved in various forms of music performance, and I haven't done it for a really long time. But I do think that lighting for, not just for plays and dance and not just for musicals, dance and opera, but even for plays, there's a lot of, you can draw a lot of parallels between musical ideas and lighting ideas. So I would say that I am conscious of the musicality of the work. And that, I guess, is very often reflected in timing. That's my favorite place in production is once you've got over that huge mountain of, pushing that big stone up that big long mountain of building those 400 cues for Sweeney Todd. Once you've got to the end of, I love the process once you get to the end of building that first wave of building cues, of now having something to respond to. It's when there's nothing ahead of you that is sort of the most terrifying part of the job. And I know lighting designers, and I never get this, who say, I love setting cues. It's my favorite part of the job. It's the hardest part of the job. It's the most stressful part of the job. It's the most heavy lifting. And I love a show where you have some time to actually now respond to what you've built before you have to walk away on opening night. And so a show that, not only has a bunch of previews, but has a bunch more rehearsals where you can really start to finesse and fine tune. I love that part of the process for sure. As far as the creation phase of the job, this is a little bit more on the practical side, but I think it's telling and reflects maybe my age. So when I started working, we were still hand drafting everything. I started using ALD Pro when I was at university, and then that subsequently became Lightright, sort of our lighting database software. But when computer-aided drafting and design became a real thing for us to start using, I was a little bit late to that party, but not too late. I just didn't want to have to fight with a computer to get a plot out the door. But I started using Vectorworks, and for the longest time, I used the computer medium in a very two-dimensional way. I'd have a plan and a section on the computer, and I'd still bounce back and forth between plan and section the way that we do in order to figure out the shots and the angles and the beam sizes and all of that stuff. And then I would just use Lightright as a repository for the design data. I still, to this day, create, and this will be boring for the non-lighting designers, but I still use Lightright as a place to work up the design. I work up the whole design in Lightright as a container for the design before I draw a single light on the computer. My feeling is that you can't just start putting lights on the page when you have your first idea. There's a good chance you're going to run out of lights, or you're going to run out of space, or you're going to find out there's not enough circuits in the front of house or on stage or whatever. And so I use Lightright as a container for all of my ideas, and the ideas evolve and percolate along in that container. And until I figure out that all of my ideas can be done as I desire, and I figure out the instrumentation and basically the distribution of the equipment. And if I get to a place where I run out of lights, where I know I've got 60 lights, like I've just landed, I'm in the process of landing my preliminary for Dracula, and I've got about 65 conventional focusable units available to me in the kitty. It's what's left over after the other two shows. And I've got about 59 lights on my wish list. So I'm like, oh, I can probably make that work, But, if it was all 19 degree source 4s that were available and I wanted to do a bunch of big soft edge stuff, then that's going to be a problem. So I really don't start drafting until I've worked through all of those details. But I know lots of lighting designers who, they don't start in Lightright, they start in Vectorworks. And today with data exchange between Vectorworks and Lightright, the fluidity of it, you're now basically dealing with one set of information as opposed to two separate sets of information, which is fantastic. But what's really exciting is in the last few years, and this started about a year and a half ago for me, is that I'm actually, my process has accelerated since I've really embraced using the 3D tools in Vectorworks. So, it used to be that you'd think what kind of light you want to use for a job, but then you'd have to check it, and you'd have to check every light. And sometimes it was easier than other times to check. But nowadays you can put the light in the drawing, in the model. It's because essentially a three-dimensional computer model, and you can focus the light in the model. You can place it in space, and you can tell it where to point, and then you can say, show me the beam. And very, very quickly you can see whether those 5 straight in front lights are going to be wide enough to do the job from that position. And then if you need to go to 7 across, or you need to go from 19s to 26s or whatever. For some reason, and I actually haven't kind of figured it out yet, it's accelerated the workflow. Maybe it's because now it's a single direction of workflow as opposed to before it was sort of 2 branches of workflow, and you were constantly going back and forth. And my last 3 set designs have also been done 100% in a 3D computer model form. And the construction drawings have been derived from the 3D computer model, not using CAD as a 2D drafting medium, using the 3D objects in space to generate the 2-dimensional construction drawings. So that's a really exciting development for me. And I'm still sort of figuring out what it means. But that's been a big change in my workflow for sure. Of course, it doesn't affect the director. Like I've done some operas where we've actually used WYSIWYG to try to get. It seems in Vancouver I get hired to do these big gnarly operas. Like I did Sweeney Todd for them a couple years ago, and I did a big First Nations Magic Flute before that. And we WYSIWYG'd on both of those jobs in a desire to get ahead of the time curve. Right. And ultimately, while that process of looking at lights focused in a 3D computer model was helpful insofar as understanding the physical parameters of the design, from a programming standpoint, it all went out the window when we hit the stage. And I think we might have been under the misguided impression that we could make more meaningful decisions in a computer model that might get us ahead on cueing. Even doing focus palettes with the movers is contingent on the lights that are being hung in the computer model are hung in the same orientation in the theater space and are patched the same way. And if they're not, you're screwed. They come up and they're pointing out in the audience instead of on the stage. Well, do you fix it in the patch? Okay, but now up is down and left is right. And so everything's asked backwards. So I think WYSIWYG it's a great tool. And, Kim Collier directed the Sweeney Todd we did, and she was able to, we hired Rob Sondergaard to be our wig programmer, lighting designer I referred to earlier, to be our wig guy for Sweeney Todd. And Kim was able to actually build and assess and animate all of the scenic moves in WYSIWYG. So all of a sudden there was this incredible freedom that she felt, that it wasn't just an idea written down in words, that it was something she'd actually witnessed in space. So it's a great tool. I'm not there yet as far as it being a good cueing tool for me. maybe it needs more imagination or just more experience?
I've done both, and I changed. My process is very similar to yours, where I start from light right, and because of the limitations of gear, I don't want to end up with needing 6 more 19 degrees.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I've made those, and I want to divest myself of those ideas early on, so I don't get like.
Well, and when you were drafting by hand, you didn't want to have to go and erase those 6 lights
exactly.
4 hours later.
Yeah. And I remember, and so that's what I would do. I would do that, and then the 2D production, and then I switched in WYSIWYG when I was working there to actually doing the visualization, and I only used the rendering portion because it was pretty good. It would sort of matched what I thought was going to happen. But by the same token, I was really good at figuring out in my head what it was going to look like. I knew what it was going to look like, right? So why did I need a rendering tool? And I take it to the director. The director would go,
it doesn't mean anything to me.
It doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? And so that didn't solve any problems.
Yeah.
And then when I got rid of WYSIWYG because I couldn't maintain a dongle outside of the working for the company, I went back to the process and I just went, well, this is just the same end to the mean, like same means to the end.
Yeah.
And I didn't miss it.
Yeah.
Although the idea of hanging a light and like I got really used to doing that and going, oh yes, because I trusted the photometrics, which you can. Because I did a lot of films again.
Yeah.
Very focused guy. So that way you don't have to go like section plan, drawing circles everywhere. You can just hang the things, go, yes, 5 lights can define for that.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that part. But by the same token, I know what 36 degree does at the factory theater.
But because you've worked there before.
Yeah.
So that happens when you get to visit a theater more than once. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you said a word a moment ago. You said visualize, and I think it's worth touching on that for a second. I think that there may be some lighting designers out there who are able to compose sort of mental pictures of what the stage is going to look like for them before they get there. But that's not. I don't think that's the case for me. I mean, maybe I'm selling myself short, but. I feel like if we're talking about process, that I rely a lot more on my instinct. That is, I know when it feels like I've got the right balance in terms of lights on the stage, lights in the house, in terms of warm and cool. Like, I know when it feels right. And that was one of the things that took me a while to learn early on, was to listen to that voice inside me going, you need another color of backlight, or those lights are going to be too narrow. And you ignore that voice at your own peril, you know? But I don't think I actually have fully composed mental pictures in my head of what the stage is going to look like before I get there. But there's certainly some process at work by which I'm weighing all of the needs at once. You know, on Dracula, I'm trying to decide right now. There's one very short scene that takes place downstage of a scrim, and I'm trying to decide if I need to tailor the inventory that's focused downstage of the scrim any more than it already is, or do I compromise something else? The scene's 2 minutes long. So I'm weighing that sort of in the scales, you know? Yeah. So I think I operate a lot on instinct when it comes to my decision-making. Yeah. And I don't know. I'd love to talk with somebody who has those mental pictures in their head.
I would say that when you make a choice, after several years of doing something, you sort of know what this concept's going to look like. I know what a low balcony shot's going to look and how I'm going to use it.
Right.
Dieback. I know what diebacks and with a gobo, and you can tell what those kind of colors are going to do.
Yeah.
There's always a surprise.
Yeah.
Especially given that you've never shot it on that set or with that specific paint treatment.
Yeah.
and some of it is trust. You have to sort of go,
Yeah.
I'm excited to find out what this is really going to look like.
Yeah.
And I trust that you've got enough backups that if it doesn't look good, you can, fix it. But yeah, I always,
Maybe that's one reason why I find the queuing process as stressful as I do, is because I'm not coming in with a mental image of everything that I'm building. So if it's about being in the moment, that's a lot of moments, right? And you have to be on, and you have to work at speed because you can't take 4 hours to build 5 queues. But you also want to be open to discovery and chance and being wrong about something and going, oh, I hadn't thought about this, but that's a great thing to do in this moment. I don't know. I do feel like just because I've been working as long as I have and have done as many shows as I have, I still feel like every show is a new set of discoveries. And I try to ask myself, I try not to shortchange myself of asking the hard questions and interrogating everything equally from show to show. I try not to allow my familiarity or my comfort or with, working with a collaborator over and over again or going back to a theater for the 15th time. I try not to let that lull me into a sense of not needing to work as hard, But I don't know, maybe I'm making it harder than it needs to be by living in the moment that way. I don't know.
Maybe. It might also speak to my laziness as well, because one of the reasons that I left was that because the creative portion, the really interesting portion, was shrinking. It was getting very efficient. Like, for example, I worked at the Globe Theater. Really enjoyed working there. Solved the problem of lighting the surround up until 3 feet from the audience. It's not quite symmetrical because these bombs are off center. Yeah. And so you solve all these problems that are specific to the space, and you go, oh, I can solve those problems. Now the rest of the bit is just responding to the play. Right. So, and you have to, part of the problem in lighting is there's a certain minimum of goals you have to reach for visibility and shaping and everything else. And so I kind of felt, but that was probably a detriment. Like if I was solving those problems fresh every time, I might come up with different solutions and make it better. So that's probably laziness on my part, to tell you the truth. But speaking of coming to things fresh and trying and trying to build on your naivety or trying to get yourself into a naive state, you've gone back to school and got your MFA in directing. Yeah, which is something not a lot of designers do. Not a lot of people have switched from design to directing. We have spoken about it on the podcast a couple of times where it seems obvious that, that move would be, why wouldn't more people do that? Yeah. But tell me about your process and why that was a good idea, why you felt that was the way you wanted to go.
Well, I've always felt like the designer and the director really were just sort of, the opposite sides of the same coin. Like ultimately we have the same goal in mind as far as storytelling goes. I knew that I wanted to do an MFA. I wanted, I turned 50 this year, and life on the road is not for the faint of heart, for sure. And I think it may be better suited to a younger designer, So I wanted to do the MFA to give myself some more options going forward. And I just couldn't see going back to school to study lighting design in any of the MFA programs in Canada. I thought if I go back to do an MFA in lighting, I'm just going back to get the paper. And I thought, if I'm going to go back to school and really put my designing life on hold for the better part of 2 years, I don't want to just be spinning my wheels, So I asked myself, I sort of came to it gradually, but I thought, well, what could I study that would be where I would learn a lot about being a designer? And what could I do my MFA in or do graduate work in that could transform my practice as a designer? And the answer was obvious. It was directing. I'd never directed anything in my life. I'd never really, until, I probably slowly worked up to actually going back to school over a period to study directing over 4 or 5 years. But I'd reached a point as a lighting designer where, when I was a young designer and I was very ambitious, I felt like my ambition was what propelled me into the career and sort of propelled me through those first 20 years. But I also had started to come to feel like I could actually call myself a master lighting designer. And I don't say that at all in the sense of I know it all or I'm the greatest or anything like that, because I don't believe either of those things to be true. But I felt like my practice as a lighting designer had reached a point where I could rely upon myself to always deliver strong, intelligent, passionate lighting. And I'd reached a bit of a glass ceiling working in Canada. I mean, I think that I've worked for almost all of the English language theaters, all of the English language regional theaters. I haven't worked at the Centaur. And I've worked at the Neptune. I think there's probably a regional or two in the Maritimes where I haven't worked. But I'd worked for Vancouver Opera and the COC, and I'd been at Stratford and Shaw, and I'd done some international work, and so my ambitions were kind of my sense of ambition had shifted, and that was no longer propelling me or sort of feeding my need to do the work. And so going back to school to do the MFA, I thought might be a really exciting, challenging, scary way of kind of rekindling something that had started to wane in my practice as a designer. And so, I looked around as far as what schools I might want to go to. And the reality was that I couldn't afford to go to a fancy school in the States. And my family life is at home in Vancouver. And so I wasn't in a position to uproot my wife and I, because she has her own career in Vancouver as a teacher at a university. And so I needed to pick a school that was pretty close to home, so that the disruption of being away at school wouldn't be too intensely felt. Now, that said, I was, for all intents and purposes, full-time resident in Victoria, because I did my MFA at UVic. And I lived in student housing. It was the best financial deal by far. Paid $600 a month. And it was 5 minutes from the library and 5 more minutes to the theater. I wasn't in the gen pop, I wasn't mixed in with all the first year party animals. I had a furnished apartment on the ground floor of one of the residence buildings, and all the undergrads were second floor and above. So I was a little bit on my own with, 2 or 3 other, in an area with 2 or 3 other graduate students or international students. And it was the best thing I've ever done. Obviously, I had so much to learn about the process of directing. I've never been an actor. I was a bad high school actor and a bad first year university actor, but, I've never been a practicing actor. And so I needed to learn about how to communicate with actors. I needed to learn about how to analyze a text from a new point of view. I learned about holding auditions, and I learned about working with a lighting designer. It was just total immersion. But the brilliant thing about going back to school as a mature student is that you can afford to be fearless. The problem for those 19 and 20-year-old undergrads is that they haven't achieved much in their lives yet. And so what they're doing at university is all defining. And so the stakes they feel are, I think, this is just my own analysis, but I think the stakes are very, very high for them, because if I fail at this, I failed at this. Well, I've had an almost 30-year career as a successful lighting designer. So I wasn't defined by my experience of going back to school. And so I just took the biggest risks and took the longest steps and put myself in the most challenging places that I could find through that process. And it was fantastically invigorating. I learned a ton about being a generous lighting designer by being a director, working with a less experienced lighting designer. I learned what the costume designer goes through. I learned so much about what the actors go through. And, I've been in the room with some really brilliant directors, these great Canadian directors and lots of, working at Stratford with some really terrific international directors as well. And so what I discovered was that I had learned a bunch about being a director by osmosis, by being in the room with Frank Galati or Gary Griffin or Morris Panich or Neil Monroe or whoever, and there were moments where I was like, oh, I'm having a Jackie moment here. Right. The way that I'm dealing with this moment, I think I might have picked that up from Michael Shimada. Or, oh, that's how Morris gives that kind of note. Like I just found all of these past collaborators kind of flowing through me, which was really, really exciting. So I had no preconceptions about whether I would enjoy it or whether I'd have any aptitude for it at all. And I loved the process. I loved being in that place. And I think I did a okay job of my thesis production. It wasn't perfect. No one would expect it to be. But what I've found is that I want to put myself in that place again. And so now I'm in this interesting position of needing to redefine myself as a theater artist and pitch myself to potential producers in a new way, and while, most theaters in Canada might know of me as a lighting designer, they don't know of me as a director. And so, the doors aren't automatically being thrown open for me to, direct at Stratford next year. But one of the things about doing the degree in Victoria was that it meant that not many people from Vancouver saw the work. And so what I've been building towards is a first show in Vancouver that I can invite people to come and see. And I've got that production coming up this fall. I'm directing a piece of devised theater, a classroom project at Studio 58, the theater school in Vancouver at Niagara College. And so it's a chance to put that hat back on again. And I've done some assistant directing, both while I was at school, but also prior to school and since school. And that's been very satisfying. But ultimately, I want to put the big boy pants on. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity coming my way. And who knows where it'll lead. I'd be very interested to see what it would be like to take on a project as the director and the lighting designer. It's not like there's a shortage it's not like I need more to do, right. But with my show at school, so I directed Summer and Smoke for my thesis, the Williams play. I pretty much knew what needed to be done to light the show, to light my vision of the show by the time it came time for the lighting designer to do her work. She did a great job. It wasn't all what I would have done, but part of my responsibility on that production was not to just dictate how Alan Brodie would light this show, but to learn how to be a supportive leader of a group of collaborators, So it's very exciting. I don't know where it's going to take me. I don't necessarily see myself putting lighting behind me and becoming a director. I mean, who knows what'll happen. But it is a bit like going back to the beginning of a career again. And I'm not in a financial position to go back to where I was when I was 20 years old. So, there'll be some balance to be found there. But it's a pretty exciting development for me. Yeah.
And as someone who's gone back to school as an adult, I completely understand.
Yeah.
It's a whole different focus.
It's so different. Yeah.
Do you have any advice, just as we close? So we talked about being an undergrad and having it be not only career defining, but personally defining.
Mm-hmm.
How do you have any advice for people who are starting out to try and shuffle, like just to get rid of that weight and try new things? Like, do you think there's a better way of approaching it, or is it just like this is just the way it is, and you have to get some life experience?
Well, I think that lots of undergrads are saddled with what they acquire in their programs as undergraduates, which is this idea that they know everything, you know. And there's some schools that are a little more guilty of that than other schools, where you continually see people coming from this program or that program who struggle to find their way or to find their place. I think you have to practice. You know, my advice to somebody coming out of school is, I understand you have to pay the rent. And that might mean doing some hanging and focusing of lights or doing show calls. But if you want to be a designer, you need to put practicing as a designer as your number one priority. And for a while, you're going to get paid nothing. And then for a while, you're going to get paid a little. And then for a while, you're not going to get paid what you deserve. And then you're never really going to make the big bucks. But I would say, like in my career, it took 10 years to get to a point. I might have said that to you. I don't know if we were rolling then or not, but it was 10 years before I felt like I could reliably sort of pay the bills, you know? And that 10 years, that might have been 100 shows. That's a lot of practicing, you know? And those first 20 shows were god awful, but I had to get them out of my system, you know? I would also say, for lighting designers, do some assisting. There's a really, you know, the continuum of like when you look at the continuum in Canada, like you can draw these lines from, you know, Michael Whitfield to Rob Thompson to Kevin Lamotte to me to whoever assisted me. Like there's this stuff that you only learn by being a fly on the wall with a more experienced designer doing the work. And it's a really important investment in your learning. And the learning only has just started at university. The learning will continue. Hopefully, you will be a lifelong learner. Certainly, 20, 30 years in, you still don't want to take anything for granted. You're still learning about how to do the job, and you're learning about yourself as a creative being and how you work and how you collaborate, and it's also an evolution. So it's constantly in flux. But practice. Do some assisting. Those are my two big pieces of advice.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was designer cum director Alan Brodie speaking to me from the Shaw Festival in Toronto in May of 2017. Next time, another episode of The Bellows, and then on to a discussion with Andrea Lundy from the National Theatre School. The music for this podcast is by Vern Good, with a voiceover by Gabriel Cropley. Please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. It'll help get the word out about this podcast and share the history of theatre design in Canada. And you can follow us on Twitter at The Title Block CA and on Facebook.com/The Title Block Podcast. You can send comments and requests by email to thetitleBlock@gmail.com. And don't forget that if you like the show, please support us on Patreon.com. Feel free to share this with your friends, colleagues, students, and teachers, or listen to it while you pine for the days that a Canadian producer would tour a full-scale musical to Hawaii and Alaska and points in between. Those days, I'm afraid, are over, friends. I'm Michael Cruz, and I will see you next time on The Title Block.
and I've just taken a bite, which is awesome.
I should have talked another 30 seconds.
It's okay. Sorry, I'll just
That's
stop
okay.
eating in your ear.
Yeah, that's okay.